we are continuing our study on how we got our English Bible. And for those of you that weren't here last week, Mutt, I've just been informed by Jeremy Lawson that that last week's video is up on our website already. So that's kind of neat. He got that down to Kathy. Kathy hands it off to Patrick, and Patrick does his wugga wugga stuff with it, and magically it appears on our website and on our YouTube channel. So, yep. So if that remains the way things are going to go, then that'll be great, because I'm sure there are people that and I don't say this because I'm the one that's teaching this class, but the material is available for anyone at any time that wants to go back and review or look things up or whatever. It's there. So anyways, we're going to continue our study of how we got our English Bible. I have a handout for you a little bit later into the class. And and I don't know if you folks know this or not, but the email blast that goes out on Wednesday mornings that has the link to to log into the Google Meet and all that will have a PDF file attached to it with the handouts. So if for some reason you can't make it a week or two or whatever, and you want to stay up on things, the PDF is attached to that email. And you can print it, open it up and print it out yourself. So, but if you come to class, you get it for free. So, here's an interesting slide that I thought was kind of neat. I love sausage. It almost doesn't matter what kind of sausage it is. I really love sausage. And you're saying, well, that's nice, Paul, but what in the world does sausage have to do with the Bibles? I mean, the Bibles are on one side, the sausages are on the other. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I don't know, every time I see this slide, I start getting hungry, so I'm going to have to hurry up past this slide. Anyways, Dr. Douglas Moo, that's his name, is a New Testament scholar. He teaches at Wheaton College, Wheaton Seminary, their graduate school. He's been around for a while. Dr. Moo has been around for quite a while. And he always has this quote that he tells people when this subject comes up. He says there are two things nobody wants to know: how sausages are made and how Bibles are translated. And I saw that quote and I says, this is going in. This is going in the slide presentation, because that is so true. That is so true. I don't want to know anything about how sausages are made, what goes into them or anything like that. All I know is I like sausages and I like to eat them, and that's enough for me. Well, people sometimes have the same thoughts when it comes to the translation of their Bible. It's like, I have my Bible, and I take it to my class, take it to church, and I read it, and and I'm happy about that. I don't want to, don't confuse me with the facts, and I think that's very true. It's like people are almost afraid to find out how the Bible was actually translated, how it was put together. I mean, if people were really interested in this subject, let's face it, this classroom would be full, and would have 30 or 40 people following us online, okay? And I don't say that because I'm teaching it, I'm saying because of the material, But I think some people shy away from wanting to understand something that we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper in starting tonight. James White, and I mentioned this last week, I recommend his book, The King James Controversy. You can get this. Actually, I wish that the church had the budget to buy this book for everyone, at least in this class, because I think it's well worth having. Not only does he cover the King James controversy, but he also covers Bible translation. And I just want to kind of draw your attention to that tonight, because Dr. White has something to say close to the beginning of his book. And you have to remember, I guess we could say the second part of this study is going to be on the King James controversy. And so I'm using White's book along with other resources. But he says this in chapter 3 at the beginning. And again, he's talking about the King James controversy, but I want to take it as, outside that boundary. He says the King James only controversy plays upon the fact that most Christians today are more than slightly fuzzy on the particulars of how we got the Bible, how it was passed down through the years, and how it has been translated into the English language. And, that's just part of the meat of the quote is coming up here. That's what most cultists know also. They know that most people's doors that they go to and knock on, and someone answers it, and they say, well, I go to such and such a church or whatever. And then they'll say, really? Well, we use the King James version of the Bible, and I'd like to share some verses. I don't know when the last time you met with a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or another cultist. The first thing they want to do is say, let me share some verses with you. Okay? Because they know that most people don't understand that when they quote from the Bible, they're basically tearing it from its context, which is a separate subject altogether. But folks that hold to the King James only, that's kind of the basis that they're going by in the arguments. And I've read enough of the arguments to understand that. But that aside, White goes on and he says, I am sincerely convinced that if most believers had a solid grasp of the history of the Bible and were familiar with at least the broad outline of how translation is undertaken, the King James only, and again, he's dealing with that, the King James only issue would be more of a slight disagreement than a full-blown controversy. Okay? That center part's important, okay? He says he's convinced that if most believers understand, the history of the Bible, if they understand how it was translated, at least a broad, and that's what I think we're doing here. We're giving a broad spectrum here of how we got our Bible and how it was translated. Then, most of the issues that we deal with other folks could be done away with, because we'll have a better understanding of why we trust God's word and how it came to be the Bible that you're holding in your lap tonight. So let's thank you. Now, most of what we're going to be covering in this class from here on out is going to deal with the New Testament, and you need to know that up front. But the arguments that we're going to be making and the discussion that we're going to be involved in, it covers all of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. I've chosen, for time's sake, to pretty much concentrate on the New Testament, because it just becomes too broad of a subject to go into the Old Testament. But the truths that we're going to be looking at, especially tonight, apply to the whole Bible, not just the New Testament, even though we're going to be looking at New Testament verses and all. So, and that means the translation methods that are used, the misconceptions that people hold about the Bible and its translation. That's true for the Old Testament as well as for the New Testament. So just keep that in mind as we go along here. Okay? we're going to talk about some misconceptions when it comes to the translation of our Bible. And there's only a couple of them. You know, this could go on for a long time, but I kind of narrowed it down to just two, so we could move away from here. Transmission of ancient documents, and this is what the critics will say. Okay, the critics of the scriptures. You know, how I mentioned last week. You know, the History Channel, National Geographic. You know, the Secrets of the Bible, you know, whatever is those ones that are on TV. Okay, this is what they'll say, is that transmission of ancient documents is more or less linear. In other words, it went one person communicating to a second person, communicating to a third person. So I tell Jane, say, a verse of scripture, and then she tells Mutt that same verse, and then Mutt tells Gary, and Gary tells Wayne, and that's how critics say that the Bible was transmitted. Okay, that's how it was transmitted. The truth, or the fact behind this, is that the Bible wasn't transmitted that way. It was transmitted geometrically. In other words, there were 5 copies. There was one epistle. Let's say the epistle of Jude or whatever. Pick an epistle, okay? 5 people copied that, and then it went out. And then 5 more people copied that, and it went out. And that's why the scriptures, by the end of, you know, like the 150s, 160 ADs, was spread throughout the entire Mediterranean, because the Bible multiplied so quickly. And the way it multiplied so quickly is because it was copied so many times. That's why we have so many fragments of and pieces of papyrus that have verses on it, because it just went everywhere, and it went everywhere so quickly. So it's not like the modern game of telephone. Anybody in here played that game, you know, when you're a kid or whatever, even as adults, okay? You know, I don't know, maybe you get in a circle or whatever, and one person has a sentence that they're given, and then they tell the next person, and then that person tells the next person, and you go around the room, and by the time it gets to the end, whatever that was is like, you know, it's kind of like this. You know, the first guy says peas, and the second person says bees, and the third person says knees. Then it becomes cheese, and before you know it, it's fleas. Okay, that's not how the Bible was transmitted. Okay, it was transmitted in what's called the scriptorium. That's usually how it was done. Now, this is a nice, clean scriptorium, probably from the Middle Ages or something like that. I don't think the ones in the first century where it looked this nice, but this is how it was done. Okay, there was usually someone that had the original, and there were others out here that had, you know, quill and papyrus or parchment or whatever, and that person would dictate, and then everyone would write it. And that's how the Bible got transmitted so quickly to all parts of the Roman Empire at this time. Right? It was through this method. Okay. A second misconception that people have when it comes to the Bible is that it was transmitted orally. Okay? And the critics say, you know, if something is transmitted orally, then it's easier to distort, easier to misconstrue something than something that's written. And that's true. When I stand up here and teach, I'm speaking, you know, I'm delivering orally, right? And it's very easy for me to make a mistake. As a matter of fact, if you want to keep count, you'll probably find dozens of them as I go through the teaching tonight, okay? As I'm teaching orally. But when I sit down and I write something, and I write it out, you know, I have to think about each and every word that I'm putting down. Okay? That's the difference between oral oral transmission and written transmission of God's word. Because if it was orally, now don't misunderstand me. Was the Bible? Yeah, it was spread that way, but the majority of the teaching came through the writings. Came through the writings. When something's written down, it can be tested. You can evaluate. I'm going to give you this handout in a little bit. Okay, it's written. Okay, I took the time and I thought about the words and I put them into a format that everyone can use and read. Okay, if there's something in here that's incorrect, that's on me. Okay, when I teach from and the same thing applies to anyone that stands up before an audience and teaches. Okay, it's one thing to stand up and someone misunderstand what you're saying. It's totally different when you put it in writing, and now they gotcha. Now they gotcha. Okay, so that's the difference between oral transmission and written transmission. Our Bible was transmitted, but in written form. Okay, and that's what the evidence says. Okay, that's what the evidence. You're gonna get this in a second here. Just let me go on here just a little bit. Okay, so that's just a couple of the misconceptions that are out there. There are others. I'm not going to worry about it. What I want to do is I want to talk about translation of our Bible. Okay, how is our Bible translated? Okay, and we're going to start. Well, let's see. I guess we can give this out. You know what I say every time I give a handout, don't you? Okay, please stay with me. And some of you are going to be over on page 3 saying, "Oh, wow, I can't wait till he gets over here." Just kind of hang in there with me. I don't know that we're going to get through. It's 2 pages. I don't know that we're going to get through all of it tonight. So if you can bring it back next week, I'll let my lovely assistant do the handouts here. Okay, I think there's enough for everyone.
Did you say the church is going to order the King James controversy for us?
No, I did not.
Well, I mean,
Barry, you heard me. I did not say that.
They're not going to order. I'm going to order my own.
Yes, you do that. You do that. Yeah, no, I said it would be nice if they could do that, but then.
Oh, I thought you said they were going.
No. I have to be careful. I have an elder sitting in here, so I have to.
Write that down.
I have to. Yeah, that's right. That was given orally. It wasn't written, so you can't hold me to that. Okay.
It's on page 3.
Okay. Now, everything that's up on the screen is in the notes. Well, most of everything that's up on the screen is in the notes. There are some things that I left out. You'll notice that at the bottom of the at the bottom of the slides, and this applies for probably the next half dozen slides, you have Bible translations. Okay, that I didn't just put that in there to take up space and make it look cool. Okay, those Bible translations will tie in with what is on this page. Okay, so we're going to start off talking about formal equivalency. Okay. Now we're going to get some big words going here, so just kind of, you can look up the definitions if you want, but I think I'm pretty clear on this. Okay, formal equivalency is the method of translation that gives a literal translation, as literal a translation as possible. It seeks a word-for-word translation from one language, and that language being Greek, from one language into another. Okay, that's what's called formal or equivalency, and I guess it's probably easier to say word for word. Okay, those versions of the Bible at the bottom of the screen are formal equivalency translations. In other words, they are word for word for the most part. Okay, hold on to that thought. We'll clarify that as we move through this. Okay. The English Standard, the New King James, the King James, New American Standard. There's probably others out there, but I'm dealing with the biggies, I think. they are all word-for-word translations. In other words, when the translator sat down with the Greek text, they decided that they would use formal equivalency to translate the English Standard Version. Okay, so I got an example for you, and it just so happens, since I had that great picture from Germany, I thought I'd put a German phrase up on the screen to confuse us all. Okay, this is a German phrase. It's a figure of speech, and let me try and mess this up as best as I can. And I have to be careful. My wife's sitting here who knows how to speak German. I should have her come up here and say that, but I'll say it just to save time. Okay. Morgenstund hat Gold in Mund. Okay. That's as best as I can do. I know those of you that might know some German are saying, "Oh boy, you butcher that." Okay. Okay. But that's the German phrase. That's the German phrase. Okay. Now, if we take that and we literally translate that, it becomes this: the morning hours, or the morning hour, has gold in its mouth. That's a literal translation, a word-for-word translation of that German phrase up there. Okay, that's what I mean by literal. Okay, it's a word-for-word translation of whatever language. I'm dealing with German here. Of course, the Bible is in Greek. Okay? Formal equivalency is great to a point. Okay, but this German phrase is less meaningful than if we took the words and used something that was better for us to understand in English. Okay. The phrase, the morning hour has gold in its mouth, really doesn't mean much to me. So I need something that's going to be more readable. And in order to become more readable, I need to change the method of translation. So rather than going with formal equivalency, I change over to what's called dynamic equivalency. Don't let those words throw you for a loop. Don't clock out on me here. Just stay with me, okay? Formal, and it's also known as functional equivalency, okay, seeks to translate the meaning from one language into another. Here's the key: even if it involves sacrificing a word-for-word translation in the process. It's more of a thought for thought. Look at the bottom of the screen. These are dynamic equivalency translations. Okay, that's thought for thought. Okay, thought for thought. So this German phrase that's a figure of speech, if we translate that into English using this thought for thought or dynamic equivalency, it now makes a little bit more sense. Okay, if we translate it into English using a dynamic equivalency, it's more like the early bird catches the worm. Okay, now that makes a lot more sense to me in English than the morning hour has gold in its mouth. That doesn't make any sense to me, even though those words are exactly what the German says. Okay, these words here make more sense. So you can see there's plus and there's minus to translating word for word and translating thought for thought. Okay, and we're going to look at some examples here in a few moments to kind of drive home that point. But I have to kind of throw this. This is like a sidebar. Okay, so just kind of bear with me. There are two Bibles out there. The Holman Christian Standard Bible and the Christian Standard Bible that are both published. I throw this out there because they're Southern Baptist Bibles. That's what I'm calling them, okay? Because they're published by Holman Bible Publishers. Holman Bible Publishers is the publishing arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, for those of you that don't know that, okay? These are two Bibles that they publish. Okay? They publish a lot of Bibles, but these are two that the Southern Baptist Convention actually translated and brought out. The first one at the top is the first edition, and then the one on the bottom, the second one, the Christian Standard Bible, came out about I just want to say 2, maybe 3 years ago. And what they did is they changed some things in it. I still like the HCSB over the CSB. As a matter of fact, I started using the Holman Christian Standard Bible to teach from not too many years ago, and there were so many people using other translations that I just gave up on it, even though I think it's one of the better translations to read. I say that because if you read the preface, that's the beginning of the book, okay? Kind of like introduction. Okay, the publisher or the translators came up with this phrase, optimal equivalency, and I just mentioned that in passing. Don't worry about it. I just want you to understand that there are, what they tried to do is they tried to take formal and dynamic and kind of mix it together, and now we've got this kind of neat term that we've come up with called optimal equivalency. And to me, if you read it, I don't know. I don't have an issue with what they're what they say, but it just, to me, it's one or the other, or maybe a combination of both. So just so you understand, there's some other translation issues out there. This is just one of them, but the two that we're dealing with is dynamic and formal. Yes, Gary.
Paul, don't you think, and this is, I think, a standard question, and I have, and a lot of other people have too, with all these translations that have come out, do you feel like this is maybe confusing the lost world, or the person who's trying to learn, and they're trying to figure what is right and impression when one says one thing and one says another? I have a problem with our NIV. Of course, I taught out of the King James for years and years, years on the mission field, and the Spanish equivalent of the King James. But I find like it leaves what to me is a very important part. Well, for example, the Ethiopian eunuch, when he said, "What is here? There's water here. What's to keep me from this?" And it completely leaves out what Philip told him. He said, "If thou believest in the name of Jesus Christ, thou can be baptized." It leaves that out. The NIV leaves it out. And if it completely eliminates this, you've left a very important doctrinal point out.
And that's a good argument, and that's one of the arguments that the KJV only people will use, is that they'll flip you right over to Acts. Was it 8, or 7, or 6, or 5, or 4, one of those, and show you the passage. Okay, let me hold off trying to answer that because I think I'm going to answer that as we go through this. Okay, and if I don't, you just call me on the carpet with it. Okay, because remember, I'm speaking orally and I'm not writing this down. So okay. Okay, and I'm not trying to brush you off or anything. I think we'll answer that as we go through this. Take your Bibles, if you would, and open them up to Luke chapter 9. To Luke chapter 9. Let's look at a few examples from Scripture so that you can understand the difference between formal or word for word and dynamic, which is thought for thought. Okay, Luke chapter 9, and look down to verse 44. Luke 9:44, and I have it up on the screen from the NASB and from the NIV. And look at the difference in the translation. I told you to open your Bibles and look at your verse. Now I'm saying look at the screen. So flip a coin. Here's how the New American Standard translates 9:44. It says, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." Okay, it's the highlighted words that I'm concentrating on. Okay, I have never in my life had someone come up to me and say, "Let these words sink into your ears." Okay, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I don't. What are you talking about? Let these words sink into your ears. Okay, but that's the literal rendering of the Greek. The word for word. That's the words. Now, look what the NIV does with the same verse. This is a thought for thought. They say, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Now, I have had people over the years say those exact words to me, and you know what? I understood every word they said. Okay? So that we're going to look at some other ones here, but that's the difference between a formal or the word for word translation and the thought for thought translation. It's, and understand this, it's the exact Greek text. Okay? The text is the same for the NIV as it is for the New American Standard. It's the exact same Greek text. But the translators of the New American Standard chose to go with formal equivalency or word for word. The translators of the New International Version and others have chosen to go with dynamic or functional equivalency, which is thought for thought. Okay, so you can see just in this simple little illustration, there's a big difference between one translating it one way and translating it another way. Okay, let's look at another one. Turn back to Psalm 23, which I'm sure we could all quote verbatim here if we needed to. Psalm 23, and we're not going to look at the whole psalm. We're only going to look at one verse. Psalm 23, verse 5. Psalm 23, verse 5. In the New King James Version, this is the one that we're probably most familiar with, okay? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, okay? The highlighted portion is what I'm bringing out here. This is word for word. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over, okay? That's a word for word, a formal translation in the New King James. Reads the same way in the King James also, I believe. Okay. Now, look what the New Living Translation does, okay? The New Living Translation is a thought for thought, or a dynamic translation. And they say, you prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me. Now, this is how they're translating it. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Okay? It's the exact Hebrew text in both places. Whether it's the New King James or whether it's the New Living Translation, the Hebrew text is identical. It's the translation process. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get us to, if we can get our heads around this, you're halfway home on this whole thing, okay? It's the translation process that makes, my translation, which I think I mentioned last week, I do most of my study out of the New King James. Even though I'm not a King James kind of guy, okay, I do a lot of my study from the New King James. I have the New King James Study Bible, and I like the study notes in it. I think they're great. I would recommend it, okay? But, I look at other translations to see what they say, okay? This is a little bit easier to do when you have a computer program, or a lot of you folks have the thing you do on your phone. I haven't quite got that far yet. Where you can have multiple translations up at the same time, okay, which is cool. But what I want you to understand is it's not so much that they're mistreating the Greek or the Hebrew text. It's the translation process that they've chosen when they created the New King James, or they created the New Living Translation. Okay, that's key. That's kind of where we're going with this. Let me show you one more. You don't have to turn there, because we'd be here all night trying to find the book of Amos. But let's not just go with what's up on the screen. Okay. Now here's a situation where, and I put this up here because the King James Bible and the New International Version are lockstep on this verse. But the King James Version is what? It's a formal translation, isn't it? The NIV is kind of thought for thought. But they kind of go hand in hand. And then on the other side of the screen, you've got the New King James and the New American Standard, okay? And they're translating it like thought for thought. So on the left side of the screen in yellow, you have word for word. On the right side of the screen, you have thought for thought. And I just found it interesting that, because, the King James and the New International Version are like day and night when you read them, of course. But, here's a point where they both agree on the way that this verse in Amos should be translated. Now, whether it's 3 years or 3 days, I got to leave something for you folks to investigate this week, so I'll let you figure it out. And if you want to give a dissertation on it, that'd be great. That's not my idea here is to discuss which translation is correct, but just to show you that they go in and out sometimes. Okay, they go from thought for thought to word for word. They go from word for word to thought for thought. Okay, so this is another one of my favorite slides that I use frequently.
I've been on a diet 3 months. I have to watch television with this. Now I've got to watch it here.
I always call it the BLT. Okay, it's bottom line time. Okay, this is great, Paul. Okay, now we know that there's basically two ways of translating, the scriptures, word for word and the thought for thought. So what do we do now? Well, think about this. Okay. And again, I think most of this is in your notes. So, literal rendering of the Greek. Okay, that's a formal translation. That's a word for word. Okay, New American Standard, the New King James, the English Standard Version. Okay, excuse me. Those Bibles make great study Bibles. Great study Bibles. And do the other ones do? Yeah, the other ones do also. But these ones, really, because they're going word for word through a passage, okay, they can go a little bit deeper. Dynamic equivalent translations, or what I've been calling thought for thought translations, they make very readable Bibles. Okay, the NIV is a very readable Bible. I hope I don't burst anybody's bubble here tonight, but when the NIV was translated, they basically translated so that an 8th grader could understand the Bible. Okay? Now, the New International Version is the best-selling Bible in history, period. Okay? It outsells everything else. To this day, it outsells everything else. Okay? But, as far as a study Bible goes, now, I had, and I used for decades the NIV. I used the NIV for decades, and not that I don't use it anymore. I still use it, but it's just that I'm going more with a formal Bible, formal translation Bible, like the New King James or the ESV. Okay, so there's a difference there, and again down at the bottom there's pluses and there's minus to whichever method is used for translation. So understand. I can't even remember why I brought all these Bibles tonight. There was a reason. Oh yes, we haven't got to it yet. Okay. Sometimes I confuse myself. Okay, but just bear with me. Okay, I still got 15 minutes, so I can see if I can confuse you as much as I am. Okay. Most Bibles, I don't care if it's a King James or whether it's the New Living Translation, okay, their primary source of translation may be word for word or thought for thought, but they go back and forth. Okay, and they do that to help us understand the words that that are written in the Greek or in the Hebrew. Okay, and I honestly believe that. I mean, I know there's folks out there that this is a New American Standard. This is a Bible of Satan. Okay, That's what the KJV only people teach. Okay, this Bible, this is a new, this is a new King James. Well, isn't it King James only? Yeah. You know what? This is another satanic Bible. Okay, this Bible is written by heretics. Okay. Well, wait a second. It used the same Greek text that you used for the King James. Doesn't matter. It's not a King James, even though it used the same text to translate. Okay, that's how. Excuse me the phrase. That's how stupid the argument gets at times. Okay, and I can't wait till we get to the new King James or the King James only, because I'll be a lot calmer then. Okay, we'll get all this out now. Okay, let me move on. By the way, you all know that if there's a question or a comment, you got to stop me because I'm on a roll. So here's the bottom line again. All translations, I think I already said this, right? All translations use a combination. Okay, the lion's share of the translation may be formal or it may be dynamic, but they'll go back and forth, and you can see the second bullet there. Okay, that they do it to incorporate other styles so it makes more literary sense. Okay, it's go back to my German phrase. Okay, if we were translating that, word for word, of course, that the morning hours have gold in their mouth. That makes no sense. So what do? I'll switch over to thought for thought and say, well, the early bird catches the worm. That makes more sense. Okay, that makes more sense. So, best method of translation. Word for word or thought for thought? Well, okay. There's other issues that are involved in translation that we really can't get into. I mean, I mentioned last week, we just don't have time to cover it all. We covered some of these, the textual disputes and the translational disputes. We covered some of that when we talked about canonicity at the end of last year. So if you look at the last two videos from last year in December, I think we cover those two issues. Okay, so leaves us with this question: which translation is the best, or which translation can we trust? Well, we got to go a little bit deeper. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the basic facts when it comes to the translation of our English Bible. Okay? And in order to do that, I thought about not putting this in, but I said, I got to put this in there because I got to give you a warning. It's like, remember Lost in Space? Danger, Will Robinson. Remember those of you that watched it. Okay. I don't want to lose anybody, so I'm putting this up. It's kind of like a disclaimer, okay? Since these next few slides may be complex, you're saying it's going to get more complex than it's already gotten. Yeah, just a little bit, but just kind of bear with me. That's why I give you a handout so you can read it on your own, okay? The information I think is understandable. I'm gonna take my time as we go through this. Again, if you have a question, stop me. I'll try and clarify it. If I can't, I'll do like I did with Gary and just say, I'll cover that later, and I will, okay? This really is important, and I don't say that because I'm teaching it. I'm saying it because I've been saved, good grief, it's close to 50 years. That's hard to believe. I was only 2 years old when I got saved, so no, seriously, I've been saved for a long time. I have never heard this material, any of this material that I've been covering, let alone what I'm getting into, taught from any pulpit in any church I've been in. Okay, I don't say that it's a slam against the pastors because they got other more important things that they're doing. But this is, to me, is Bible 101. Okay, we need to have some, whether you catch it all or not, it's not important. Just so you have an understanding of where we're going with our translations. Because the question that Gary asked is very good. You know, what do we do with an NIV that doesn't have a verse in the New King James that does? We covered multiple verses in our Bible study on Tuesday night on the life of Christ, and it was like almost every other week I had to say, no, you're not going to find this in your NIV, or you're not going to find this translated in your, NLT, but it's going to be a footnote, or it's going to be a side note, or something like that. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. Okay, so here we go, as best as I can do. All modern translations. Now, when I say all modern translations, what Bibles do I mean? Okay, don't worry about the rest of the slide for now. Okay, what are all modern translations? You have to speak up a little bit.
Anything that's not the King James.
Boy, that's too simple an answer. I was hoping for some Bible versions out there, but yeah, you're right. Is the NIV a modern version? Oh yeah. What about the New King James?
Yeah.
Yep. And the English Standard is, those are the modern translations. They're based on a Greek text. Okay, all of our Bibles are based. Our New Testaments are based on a Greek text. Okay, and there's the fancy words that the Greek text comes from. The Netherlands 27th or 28th edition. This is how you'll find it abbreviated. Or the United Bible Society's 4th or 5th edition. That's how you find it. What's so important about that, Paul? Okay, I was going to do this, but I'm not, because for time's sake. Okay, I looked at every one of these Bibles. Okay, I got 5 different translations. 5 different translations. Every one of them. Okay, I don't know if anybody besides me does this, but I read the beginning of my Bible, not Genesis 1:1. I'm talking about before Genesis 1:1. I read the translator's notes. I read the who was involved in the translation, and more importantly, now I'm reading to see what version of the Greek text is used to translate this. Okay, this is an ESV, a New Living Translation, a Holman Christian Standard, a New King James, and a New American Standard. Every one of them, and I checked these today. Every single one of them use Netherlands, Holland, and the United Bible Society's Greek text to translate the New Testament. Every one of them. Every one of them. That's when I say all modern translations. Now, this will make sense, I hope, in a few minutes when we look at the chart. But that's what they're using. That's what they're using. Okay. These Greek texts, are known as they're Alexandrian. Don't worry about that for now. I'll just throw that out there so you have the information. What follows is important. There's some of the oldest manuscripts in existence. Okay, the Alexandrian Greek texts are some of the oldest ones that are in existence. Okay, there's a wide source that they pull from, but they're all considered Alexandrian. Okay, King James Bible. The King James Bible uses a Greek text known as the Textus Receptus. Everyone should be able to say that because it sounds so cool when you say it. Okay, the Textus Receptus. It's the received text, is what it is. Okay, this is the Bible that was translated in 1611. Okay, and this Bible, I don't know how many people know this. This Bible comes from the Greek text that a Roman Catholic priest put together, named Desiderius Erasmus. Erasmus's text was published. It was the first Greek text ever published. Okay, in 1516. Okay, that last bullet's important. Okay, The Greek text of Erasmus is known as Byzantine. Okay, it's Byzantine. It's not as old as the Alexandrian text. So now we have an issue. We have these folks over here saying we've got the oldest, and we've got these people over here saying we've got the closest to the original. Okay, both of them. Well, let's see. What do I have next? Okay, this on your this is in your handout, but it's also on the screen. It looks much nicer on the screen because it's in color. Okay. If you understand this chart, folks, you're 95% ahead of most of the people in any church you go into. Because most people do not understand that there are two different families of Greek texts from which our Bibles are translated from. Okay. Well, Paul, this is really getting intense. I mean, what you need to understand this, because this is where the arguments come into play. Okay. There's one group over on this side here, okay, that follow the King James and the New King James. They have used the Textus Receptus, okay, that was put together in 1516, okay. And then you've got this other group of people over here that follow the Alexandrian families of texts, and there you go down at the bottom of the screen. All of the modern translations come from the Nettles Island or the United Bible Society's Greek compilation of the Greek text. Okay, that's how it divides. I mean, you can draw a line right down the center of the screen, and that's how our Bibles are translated. They're either using this side here or they're using that side there. Okay, and that's where the argument comes into place. Because the people on this side are saying, no, we've got the right Greek text. And the people over this side are saying, no, we've got the right Greek text. And you know what? Well, let me save that. I'll hold that thought, Paul. Hold that thought, okay? But this is an important chart. And I don't put this up here just because I like colors and stuff, okay? It does make sense. It does make sense, okay? And there's a lot more behind this argument than what I'm trying to give you in just a couple minutes, okay? And I'll tell you what, I'm gonna stop right here, because the next thing we get into is going to be not quite as intense, but it's information that you need to know. Okay, I got a couple minutes left. Any questions or comments? What's the saying? It's like drinking from a fire hose. Sometimes when I teach, that's what people tell me, and I don't mean to be like that. It's just that Jane will tell you, I get wound up when I get teaching, and it's hard for me to, take it down a notch. This is important information, and I want to see you folks not so much excited as I am, but just understanding what I'm trying to convey here. Gary, you had something.
Yeah, I was going to say, running parallel argument along with this, when I went to Puerto Rico, we ran into the Valera version of Spanish, which came out of the original autograph in 1571, which is earlier than King James. And of course, there are a lot of people like the Ruckmanites who stand on that as everything else is of the devil. But then, of course, what we preached out of was the Latin American version, which came out later, which was the Valera version was using the old Castilian Spanish, and the Latin American version uses the modern day version of the priest, so everybody can understand.
Okay.
But now we've got a new cookie in this crumble. This has been a new group of people out of Mexico have translated the King James version word for word. It's called the Gomez version.
Oh, okay.
And it's interesting because I've got that. It's got an English on one side and the Spanish on the other.
Okay.
King James.
Oh, in the King James.
These things. This is not the only place there in English we have these running problems. We got them
we got it in Spanish also. In Spanish also. Anyone else? Comments?
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
when Benzitin translated his version as a Roman Catholic priest, were the additional books that are in the Catholic Bible in that original New King
Absolutely.
James?
Yes, they were.
And so
Yes.
later on, it's like Martin Luther, I forget what, they started dropping them out.
Yeah, Luther in his German
Yeah.
translation dropped them.
Okay, I was just
The
wondering.
I think up until like the 1700s or later, the Apocrypha, they're talking about the Apocrypha books, were part of the King James Bible. Okay. They were an addendum. Sometimes they were between the Old Testament and New Testament, but they were part of the Bible. Okay. Not necessarily considered inspired, but they were printed in the Bible. They were printed in the Bible. And to this day, of course, as most of you know, any Roman Catholic Bible that you pick up will have the Apocrypha books in it. The 12, I think it's 12
So
Apocrypha
the
books in
Gutenberg
it.
Bible, and you may be getting that later on about the Gutenberg Bible. But was that Luther's translation?
No, that was actually years before Luther.
Was it?
Yeah. Now the printing press was in place when Luther came on the scene, but there's quite a bit of time between the Gutenberg's first Bible and the Luther's Bible. And so